Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall.
105.9 FM.
And AM 630.
WMAL.
637 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. It's Mornings on the Mall with Brian and Larry. Coming up later in the show at 8:05, Steve Hayes from the Weekly Standard talk about those altered talking points on Benghazi, a huge story. Then at 8:15, Wanda Gaddison of the Office of United Communications for the District of Columbia. We're going to talk about this 911 problem. Then at 8:35, our friend Larry Kudlow from CNBC. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Brian Wilson.
On the line now is MARIO MANCUSO, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism, back during the Bush years, 2005-2007. Thought it'd be a good day to sort of tap into his knowledge as we continue to learn more and more about what happened that night as the annex in Benghazi was under attack. Mr. Mancuso, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So now there's one guy who's going to testify apparently tomorrow, and he was the number 2 guy in Libya at the State Department. And he says, among other things, that, look, I couldn't get any kind of military response. I couldn't get a jet to fly over, which would have perhaps scattered these guys because they would have been afraid of, being attacked. I couldn't get the troops out of Tripoli. We're only a few hours away to get down there. I mean, you know what it is to try to get people on the scene when things are happening. Is it unreasonable to expect that they should have been able to do something militarily?
It's not unreasonable to expect that they should have been able to do something. What, obviously, is the big issue. Our 2 bases close to Benghazi, where we had fast movers, which is what Greg Hicks, who was the Deputy Chief of Mission at the time, had requested, were based in Ceuta Base, which is in Crete, which is an hour flight time from Benghazi, and Aviano Air Base in Italy, which is about a 3-hour flight time in Italy, from Benghazi. I think I for one, am going to be looking at his testimony because what's critical to me is first attack happens on our consulate at 10 p.m. We know our ambassador Chris Stevens had already died by 3 a.m. in the morning. What happened between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., which was right after the second attack on the compound? Those 7 hours, or 8 hours rather, are critical in terms of the timeline. We know for a fact that our defense attaché was standing alongside Greg Hicks, the Deputy Chief of Mission, trying to contact his counterparts in the U.S. government and in the Libyan military to get support. It's unclear, based on what's been publicly reported, what kind of success that they've had. Those communications will be critical, and I think what the contents of those communications will reveal will reflect a lot on what the administration did and, frankly, what the career civilian and military authorities did to support our team in Libya.
MARIO MANCUSO, I got to ask you, I mean, a commercial flight from Tripoli is about 55 minutes. I've got to think that a military jet can get there even faster from Tripoli to Benghazi. We now have this leaked testimony that's supposed to be in front of the committee tomorrow that says that they had special forces in Tripoli. They wanted to go. They were then told, you don't have authority, don't go on that C-130, don't go to Benghazi. Based on your understanding, what is the chain of command here? Who can tell them stand down? Who has the authority?
Well, there's an important point. That's an excellent question. There's actually an additional point. This was September 11th, so you would assume that the United States throughout the Middle East would have been on hair-trigger alert for any developments just in terms of the posture, given the significance of the anniversary. There was a C-130 down in Tripoli, ready to go. Apparently, there had been approval from the Libyan authorities to move through Libyan airspace, which is just it's a protocol requirement. Can be frustrating in times like this, but it is an actual requirement. And we know that there was a colonel, a special forces colonel, that was ready to go. His team was ready to board that C-130. Under those circumstances, what have likely happened is the colonel, the operational commander on the ground, would have spoken to regional military commanders at SOC Africa, which is Special Operations Command Africa. Given the sensitivity of the situation, in light of 9/11, there would have probably been a reach back to Washington. However, that all changes when rounds are fired. When the consulate comes under attack, in virtually every situation, that military commander, the regional military authority, so in this case, Special Operations Command Africa and the combatant command, for that part of the world, would have had, in my view, and frankly should have had, if they did not have, should have had the freedom of action to respond to an actual attack.
All right. So when you hear Admiral Mike Mullen say the following,
there simply was not enough time for U.S. military forces to have made a difference. Having said that, it is not reasonable nor feasible to tether U.S. forces at the ready to respond to protect every high-risk post in the world.
So what do you say to that?
I say, let's look at the facts. That's the first time that I've really listened to that particular clip from Admiral Mullen, but his response on my first hearing it was that it was not reasonable to conclude that we had forces that would have made a difference. Not that we didn't have forces. So I think the salient question.
Well, let me stop you there, because Greg Hicks maintains that if we had simply just had a jet fly over, that the terrorists would have scattered because they would have feared that somebody could have put a laser on them and that they would have been attacked, from the air. That just out of just the very presence of the jet flying over would probably have been enough to stop the second attack on the annex. Do you agree with that assessment?
I actually do agree with the assessment, especially in light of what we know about the Libya campaign. If we know anything about Libya, was that air power was decisive. And I tend to believe that any insurgent on the ground in Benghazi that night would have had a good recollection of what defeated Gaddafi. And so I think we'll see what Greg Hicks has to say. We know we had those fast-moving jet fighters in Ceuta an hour away. And so we know that they were there. Let's see what let's see what the facts point out. And I tend to agree with now Ambassador Hicks that we should have had something. Now, we can't do everything everywhere all the time, but this was 9/11. This is probably the most dangerous part of the world for U.S. personnel. On the anniversary of 9/11, we had military assets in the region. We no doubt had contingency plans.
Yeah.
Our consulate comes under attack at 10 p.m., and we don't have military forces on the ground until 8 hours later.
The other, just very quickly, because we're out of time, but Mark Thompson is apparently another guy who's going to testify. Do you know him?
I know of him. I know of Mark.
And his reputation is good?
Yes, he's a former Marine officer. He's a career civilian. He's at the State Department, the Office of Counterterrorism. By all accounts, he's a patriot.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for giving us your guidance today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.